Hey guys, if anyone is watching this who does not know me, my name is Sheila Dana Jackson, and I posted a video a couple weeks ago about just some things about why I wanted to be a missionary and, well, just a few things. And I had some people respond and say, are you going to do more videos? And at first I thought, well, what kind of videos would I do? But I started to realize that I do like putting together things like devotionals, and I've been putting together some brief ones recently for church, so I thought maybe I would kind of give it a shot. And this is the first one I'm going to do. I'm going to attempt to do one a week for a little while and just kind of see how it goes, if anyone's interested in it, or if you all get sick of seeing me every week. And these are meant to be just brief, like 10-minute little devos to get you on your way and hopefully give you something to think about and give you some insight into Scripture. Feel free always to put some comments below and to just have an open discussion about anything that I talk about. I'm here to learn and grow myself, not just to teach. I definitely have a lot of learning and growing that I need to do myself. So please let me know anything else that you see or just any feedback that you have. This first one today is going to be on Isaiah chapter 42. Let's see, verses 1 through 4. I've been studying the book of Isaiah because, as you can see, it is Christmas time, and I am coming at you with some in-your-face Christmas joy. I love Christmas time. And the book of Isaiah is full of prophecies of the coming Messiah. So that's really fitting as I'm preparing to celebrate the coming of Jesus into the world as a baby. Specifically, in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 1 through 4, it says, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his law the islands will put their hope." So if you know anything about the prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, all of these books tend to focus on you guys have sinned, and here's your coming judgment. So when God is talking about justice, it very often is something that's negative. It's punishment. And if you look up the definition of justice, which I'm not going to look it up now, but I looked it up recently, so I'm going to paraphrase it. It was from the Webster Merriam Dictionary, so look it up online if you want a more accurate thing. But basically it was saying that justice was giving someone what they deserve in terms of reward and punishment based on their actions and based on some standard. So in this case, justice is typically portrayed in the Old Testament as you guys have turned your back on God, and so now God is going to judge you and bring about justice. And they were doing some horrible things. They even had a king who was sacrificing his kids in fire to serve a god, and they had people building idols and all sorts of immorality. So they had completely turned their back on God many times, and each time God would send prophets to come and say, "Turn back to me, and if you don't, I'm going to allow the Assyrians to conquer you, or any other people group to conquer you." So justice wasn't something that would have been perceived with a whole lot of fond thoughts in the Old Testament. So when I read this passage, the thing that jumped out to me was how it says, the very last line, "In his law the islands will put their hope." And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? That God is tying justice to the concept of hope. And how does that make sense? So I thought about it a little bit here, and I thought about what is God doing ultimately to have justice? Okay. Well, as Christians, we perceive the gospel as a message of hope. The whole thing is full of hope because the gospel message is, in a nutshell, we're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. Therefore, in order for us to be reconciled with God, we need to get rid of our sin, which isn't possible. We need to be judged for our sin. There has to be justice. In order for God to be a just God, he can't let people and sin go unpunished. Therefore, he sends his son into the world so that we might be saved. So that is a gospel message of hope. So what I started to realize was we can have hope, and even more specifically, we can have hope in justice, because God is a just God. In order for him to stay true to his character, he has to see justice fulfilled. He can't let any crime go unpunished or sin go unpunished. So, what does he do? God comes himself as a baby so that we can see him as a human, as an actual person. It says that he was fully God and fully man, all in one. So God comes himself as a baby, who's raised as a baby, who learns as a baby. He learns how to walk, he learns how to crawl, he learns, well, opposite order, but he learns how to talk. He goes through all of the things that humans do. He goes through all the feelings that humans do, so that in the end, he can come through all of that and live a perfect life, because he's God. So he's the one person who is capable of living a perfect life. And then at the end of that, Jesus dies on a cross, and there's a moment, it says, when God turns his back on him and he puts all of the punishment that we deserve on his own son, or on his own self, which is kind of a complex thing to explain. But it was God come in the flesh as Jesus Christ, who bore the punishment for our sins, therefore fulfilling justice. There's a passage where Jesus says, I have not come to abolish the law, but I have come to fulfill it, and that's what he does. So when you look at it that way, there is hope in justice. Justice doesn't have to be a terrifying concept. Justice is going to happen regardless, because we have a just God. But God came and he sent his son so that there could be justice and there could be punishment, but not on us. We no longer have to bear that burden. Therefore, we have hope in God's justice. Isn't that neat? I love it. All right. Another thing I notice here is, it says here, talking about Jesus, he will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. Did Jesus ever shout or cry out in the streets? He did. There's a very famous passage of him going into the temple and throwing over the tables of the money changers and saying that we've turned it into a den of thieves and robbers. So Jesus did get passionate and he did raise his voice. That's not what this passage is meaning. It's not literally saying he's never going to yell. But when I read that, the way that I interpreted that was basically to mean that Jesus is not going to be a catalyst of political change like they're expecting. Because when Jesus does come, they basically respond confused as to why he's not overthrowing the government and taking control in the way that they expected. But God's saying Jesus isn't going to come and do those things and be exactly like you expect him to be. There's a bigger game here. There's a bigger plan. So I look at that and I kind of think just about the fact that they didn't have a full picture back then. Like, to them, justice was something that was always worked out then, like with people conquering them and whatnot. They viewed all of that as punishment in the here and now. They expected Jesus to look completely different than he did. There was just so much that they didn't understand, that they couldn't understand. And I look at that and I think, oh, you poor people, you just you have such an incomplete picture, such a portion of what God is actually planning on doing. You just don't see the whole thing yet. So, and then I was thinking, but we don't have the whole thing yet either. Because God's talking about bringing justice, and that justice bringing hope. But do we live in a just world? 100%. We have a just God. We know that. We know that God has made a way for his justice to be fulfilled through Jesus Christ. But do we see injustices? Turn on the news. We still have children who are being killed in a conflict in Syria that they did not start. We have families suffering from a famine in Ethiopia that they had no part in. But they're the ones who are suffering. That's not justice. We have children who are dying from cancer and parents who lose their children in the womb. Horrible things. None of that's justice. And so I realized again that we're not so different than the Israelites, because they're living in this time when they're expecting God to bring about justice in a different way than he did. They know there's a coming Messiah, but they think that that Messiah is going to save them from the Romans when he actually comes. And that's not his intent. He came to save them from spiritual bondage, from the darkness of sin, from the bondage of suffering and of being weighed down by guilt. Because honestly, who of us does not have guilt and shame for our actions? I would be concerned if someone said that they had none, or that they had never had any, because that means they don't have a conscience. But Jesus came to free us from those things, so they didn't understand that. They didn't expect that. But we too have an incomplete picture of the entire plan that God has in store for us, because we're living where that justice still is not 100% realized. We have a portion of it, but more is coming. Therefore, we have hope. We have hope in what God says when he says that there will come a time when he will wipe away every tear, when he will heal every scar, when there will be no more pain and no more heartbreak. There won't be things happening to people who don't deserve it, people who are innocent. That day is coming. God has made a way, and he is continuing to make a way. And we don't fully understand why we don't have that now. Quite frankly, that's a question that I'm going to ask. That's the question that I'm sure you have asked. Why is there still injustice? We still don't have the full picture, but we do have hope. If God can send his son, if he can come as Jesus in the flesh to break the system that held us captive, then God can do anything. All right, until next week.